There we are. Good morning, everyone. I'm Luke O'Connor, and Justice O'Connor was my grandmother. So everyone, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. And listen to Debussy's Claire de Lune, which was often played in my grandmother's room in her last month of life. Our pianist is Edwin Shue, who is an honored graduate of the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and who is also a friend of the family and my grandmother's tax attorney. Thank you.
My name is Scott O'Connor. I'm the eldest of the three sons of Justice O'Connor. Welcome to the Arizona celebration of her life. Thank you, Edwin. That was beautiful. Mom loved life, she loved music, and she loved Edwin's piano playing. So that's why he's here. We're pleased to have representatives of Arizona's elected leadership, including Governor Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, Treasurer Kimberly Yee, and Attorney General Chris Mays. And welcome Kate Gallego, Mayor Phoenix, and Supervisor Bill Gates, my good friend. We also have former Vice President Dan Quayle and his family, including Ben, our former congressman. Mom swore Dan into office when he became the vice president, and it turns out they both had cabins and spent time at Iron Springs, Arizona. Famous place on the map. We'd like to welcome Cindy McCain. We learned a lot from the beautiful services that you had for Senator McCain. We also learned a lot from Marlene Woods, who's here today, from the services she held for Grant, but are sad to report we couldn't get Charles Barkley in the program like you did for Grant. We welcome a host of judges, federal, state, and county. We welcome the Arizona State University Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law community, and we welcome Mom's friends and family. As we attended to Mom in her final days, we began planning for memorial services. She spent a full month in hospice at Hospice of the Valley's new inpatient facility on 44th Street. It's a great place with wonderful people. My wife Joni made sure that someone from the family was with Mom 24 hours a day for the entire month to prevent the possibility of her passing alone. While spending time in the hospice, we assumed Jim Sailstrom, a family friend of over 40 years, would be here to sing for you. His voice and his musical gifts are comforting. Sadly, Jim passed himself just 2 weeks before Mom, but we're pleased to share Jim's wonderful music with you through video today. We all thought Mom would live forever, but her energy and strength, we thought that her energy and strength were unlimited in our world. On Tuesday, Sally Jenkins of the Washington Post wrote this about her. 10-hour days in the saddle as a girl on the Lazy Bee Ranch were there, and so were the shooting of bottles off fences, the skiing and fly fishing, and the golf in every weather, until it seemed as if her bone structure was chiseled by the wind. She looked like, and was, someone who could go all day with nothing to eat but beef jerky out of her snap-button pocket. It's a perilous thing to equate the quality of people's minds with their physical states, but in O'Connor's case, the two were inextricable. When in doubt, go out. Mom was strong like a bristlecone pine, the longest living, toughest organism on earth, a tree that, like Mom, is chiseled by the wind. They grow in the high mountains of the West, often well above the timberline. Some are believed to be 4,700 years old. Here's Jim Sailstrom singing about these two strong characters.
Way up in the mountains on a high timberline, there's a twisted old tree called the bristlecone pine. The wind there is bitter, it cuts like a knife. It keeps that tree holding on for dear life. But hold on, it does, standing its ground, standing as empires rise and fall down. When Jesus was gathering lambs to his fold, the tree was already 1,000 years old. Now the way I haven't lived, there ain't no way to tell. When I die, if I'm going to heaven or hell. So when I'm laid to rest, it would suit me just fine to sleep at the feet of the bristlecone pine. And as I would slowly return to this earth, what little this body of mine might be worth will soon start to nourish the roots of that tree, and it would partake of the essence of me. Now the way I have lived, there ain't no way to tell. When I die, if I'm going to heaven or hell. So when I'm laid to rest, it would suit me just fine to sleep at the feet of the bristlecone pine, to sleep at the feet of the bristlecone pine, to sleep at the feet of the bristlecone.
My name is Keely O'Connor, and I am a granddaughter of the Justice. I was too young to enjoy the Lazy Bee while growing up. I was too young to enjoy the Lazy Bee Ranch as Grandma and my dad while growing up. It was sold the year that I was born. Fortunately, Grandma's brother, Alan Day Sr., and his son, Alan Day Jr., have preserved our ranch history in print and on video. Here's what you need to know about the Lazy Bee from those who lived it.
In 1880, when H.C. and Alice Day wound their way west to homestead a cattle ranch in what was then the Arizona-New Mexico territory, they must have wondered how things would turn out. As such things go, they turned out well. From this hard-scrabble, arid land, H.C., Alice, and their descendants built fulfilling lives through hard work, toughness, and the ability to adapt. Lazy Bee grew to 200,000 acres. Stand at headquarters and all you see is ranch. 4 of H.C. and Alice's 5 children would be born on the ranch. Their youngest son, Harry, would take over the ranch in the 1920s. Harry and his wife, Ada Mae, would begin their life together in a new ranch house, 10 miles south of the Gila River. The adobe house had no running water, no indoor plumbing, no electricity. But it would soon have a new generation of ranchers. Harry and Ada Mae's 3 children, Sandra, Ann, and Alan, were all born and raised on the ranch.
I was born on Lazy Bee, as was Sandra, and all the memories start from ranch life, from milking the cow to going down to the corral and seeing the calves, and was on a horse in front of my dad or in front of one of the cowboys when I was in diapers.
The impact of being raised here on the ranch was huge on what we ended up being in life, and Sandra credits her being raised on the ranch and the things that she learned here, a lot of which are to face problems one at a time and solve them. The quiet here and the serenity here, it was a wonderful place to be. And I think we just all thought the center of the universe was right here, and the rest of the world wasn't nearly as nice a place to be as this. This is our heritage. We were raised here, and it's in our blood, and it's just the place we most feel home. Sandra is such a huge person that I could spend the next hour and not even cover it all, but she's been a giant in America and broken glass ceilings everywhere and been just a hero to America, and she continues to be that. And it's broader even than that by a lot, but she's my hero.
Wallace Stegner might have been describing the ranch when he wrote, "There is something about living in a big empty space where people are few and distant, under a great sky that is alternately serene and furious, exposed to a wind that never seems to rest. There is something about exposure to that big country that not only tells an individual how small he is, but steadily tells him who he is." Through years of hard work and moments of great satisfaction, life on Lazy B allowed the Day family to know who they are. Even though the ranch has passed into new hands, what remains are connections sunk deeper than any of the wells, from which spring countless stories from the past and new ones yet to come.
Come along with me, if peace of mind's just what you need. Some call it lonesome, but some lonesome's just fine by me. I'm taking the long way home, round the horizon, to the old Lazy B. Come on, you brothers and sisters, turn drifter like me. Sometimes it's sunshine and hard work that sets you free. I'm taking the long way home, round the horizon, to the old Lazy B. We're a long, long way from the city, and we're almost home, Lazy B. There's a long tree at the high lonesome, where they're waiting for me. There's a long tree at the high lonesome, where they're waiting for me. from the city, and we're almost home. Lazy bee, there's a lone tree at the high lonesome where they're waiting for me. There's a lone tree at the high lonesome where they're waiting for me.
That was Stephen Ashbrook, who's a good friend of all three O'Connor boys, and he wrote that song after spending time with our mom. Thank you. I'm Jay O'Connor, and I'm the youngest of the O'Connor boys. Like our parents, Scott and I both attended Stanford. There's a huge cathedral in the heart of the old campus quadrangle called Memorial Church. In 2009, Mom gave a speech there about the professor at Stanford who changed her life, giving her the insight and confidence to become the person we're celebrating today. That speech was recorded on video. Mom is going to tell you her story, or that story, in her own words.
And we're gathered here this evening to remember and honor a Stanford professor who played a pivotal role in my life, and I think that of many others, the late Harry Rathbun. As you heard, I grew up on a family cattle ranch in an arid and remote part of southern Arizona and New Mexico. It was about 35 miles from the nearest town. My early companions were my parents and 5 or 6 cowboys. My parents liked to read, so books also became my companions at the ranch. We were ranchers. We didn't know lawyers and judges. My father had wanted to attend Stanford, but when he graduated from high school, his parents died soon after, and he was sent out to the Lazy Bee Ranch to keep things going until his parents' estate could be settled. That took close to 20 years, and he never left the Lazy Bee Ranch. He never attended Stanford. I probably thought about Stanford because of my father's admiration for it. I was sent away to El Paso, Texas, to go to grade school and high school. I lived with my maternal grandmother. The only university to which I applied in my senior year in high school in 1946 was Stanford. With a lot of luck, I was accepted here. My parents drove me from the ranch to Stanford. On reaching Palo Alto, I think we spent the night in the old President Hotel. It's still there on University Avenue. We drove down Palm Drive the next day to the quad, and I was overcome with the beauty of this place. It was a far cry indeed from the dry, open, arid Lazy Bee Ranch in El Paso, Texas. I was assigned to live in Branner Hall, which had previously been a men's dormitory. My freshman corridor housemates became my close and my lifelong friends. 2 of those women are here tonight. After taking required courses my freshman year, I moved towards a major in economics and finished my required classes for a degree in econ in 3 years. One class I took in my junior year was an undergraduate class in law taught by Professor Harry Rathbun. He was the most inspiring teacher I had ever had. He was exceedingly kind, thoughtful, and articulate. I heard that he also welcomed students at some seminars at his home, where he talked about how the individual can make a difference in this big, complex world in which we live. I listened, as other students did, as he explained how a dedicated person could work toward a goal and accomplish amazing things. He said if we wanted to tackle an issue and would work toward constructive change, we could actually achieve many things.
Mom's editor at Random House, Kate Medina, called us to say that it was high time that Mom had a proper biography. And she had a writer in mind, Evan Thomas. We didn't know of Evan, and so we bought and read some of his books, and they were good. We called a couple of other candidates who wanted to know who else we were considering for the job. Each of them, on hearing that Evan was on the list, deferred to him and said we could do no better. Well, we're glad for that advice. Evan's book, First, is absolutely terrific. The experience of working on that book with Evan was delightful, and we all remain good friends with him and his wife, Osi, who was his full partner in the project. Evan.
Thanks, Jay. She was the first. For 200 years, all the justices on the United States Supreme Court were men. When Sandra Day O'Connor was nominated to the court in 1981 by Ronald Reagan, millions around the world watched her confirmation hearings. They saw a handsome woman with a gap-toothed smile and a kind of humble confidence that completely disarmed the senators on the Judiciary Committee, all of them male. The vote in the full Senate to confirm her was 99-0. Imagine that. She served for 24 years, casting the decisive vote in 330 cases. That is a lot of power. And after a while, pundits began writing about the O'Connor Court. But she was modest about it. Her opinions never included highfalutin phrases, and when her law clerks tried to write them in, she crossed them out. She had a feel for what really mattered. She worried, what are the real-world consequences of this ruling? She had an almost uncanny sense of where the country was on tough issues like abortion rights and affirmative action, and she understood that the law needs to be made carefully, deliberately, and that the court is not always the last word. Rather, it is engaged in an ongoing conversation with the other branches of government, federal and state. She cared deeply about the U.S. Constitution. She even kept a copy in her pocketbook. She cared so much about civics that when she retired, she created a wonderful nonprofit organization, iCivics, that reaches many millions of kids, teaching them about our incredible system of self-rule, our American democracy, at a time when they really need to know those things. She knew she embodied an ideal of progress, but she was practical about how things really work. It's good to be first, she told her law clerks, but you don't want to be the last. She was also brave. It actually takes courage to be a moderate. She could have fallen in with the liberals or with the conservatives. She did not. She was truly independent, but at the same time, she was always looking for a way to bring the justices together. She did that with small, simple steps. When she came to the court, she found that only a few of the justices were coming to their weekly lunches. They were a little wary of each other. She made it her business to make them come to lunch, sometimes just sitting in their offices until they did. She was the glue, Justice Clarence Thomas told me. The reason this place was civil was Sandra Day O'Connor. She also knew how to be selfless, to share the credit. In the landmark case of United States versus Virginia, which ruled that state schools could not exclude women from admission, the opinion was originally assigned to O'Connor, who for 12 years had been the only woman on the Supreme Court. But Justice O'Connor said, no, this should be Ruth's case, turning to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg told me, I loved her for that. Where did this strength and wisdom come from? Justice O'Connor was not only the first woman on the Supreme Court, but importantly, she was the last Supreme Court justice who had been elected to popular office. In 1972, she was elected Majority Leader of the Arizona State Senate, the first woman ever elected Majority Leader of any state senate in the United States. She got a lot done in Arizona, in the Arizona legislature, the same way she got a lot done at the Supreme Court in Washington, by being tough, but also by listening. Same as an Arizona judge, just ask the lawyers who appeared before her. Being a woman of the West of Arizona informed and shaped everything she did. You could see her love of the Southwest just by walking into her judicial chambers at the court, on the walls all over, paintings and photographs of life on the high desert, of Native Americans, a great one of a noble and ancient Navajo woman given to Sandra by her dear friend Barry Goldwater. She sure never forgot growing up on the Lazy Bee Ranch. She'd like to tell this story. When she was a girl, about 14 years old, her job was to make lunch for the roundup. This meant getting up at 5 a.m., cooking a roast and a sheet cake for the cowboys, loading it onto a truck, and driving out to the roundup, somewhere out there on a ranch that covered 250 square miles. On this particular day, the truck hit a sharp rock and she got a flat. She got out, jacked up the truck, using all of her 14-year-old girl weight on the jack, changed the tire, and headed out again. When she got there, her father, the all-powerful Harry Day, looked up and said, "You're late." Sandra Day tried to explain that she had had a flat tire and it took time to change it. Her father just looked at her. Next time he said, "Leave earlier." Sandra liked to tell that story to her law clerks, the super smart, sometimes entitled young people working in her chambers. The message was clear. No excuses, no whining, get the job done. Her law clerks could be a little intimidated by her, at least at first. One of them took a photocopy of her hand and tacked it up on the wall under a sign that read, "If you want a pat on the back, lean here." But they came to recognize, as one told me, that she was setting a role model, not just as a lawyer or a judge, but as a person, as a woman who did her job and who loved her family and gave of herself to both. She liked to say, never be too busy to take care of someone. So in 2005, at the height of her power, she decided to leave the court to take care of her beloved husband, John, who had Alzheimer's. He sacrificed his career for me. Now, she said, it's my turn to sacrifice for him. Family meant everything to her. As a young girl, Sandra once asked her father, "Daddy, why don't we go to church on Sunday?" "Well," said Mr. Day, "church is too far and the preacher's no good." And he said, "Church is all around us here." Faith is sometimes hard to find in our fallen world. As a girl standing there with her father, looking up into the night sky, Sandra was able to find it in the stars up above and the land all around. As a grown-up Supreme Court justice, Sandra Day O'Connor did go to church. She read scripture on Sunday at a chapel in the National Cathedral. But she also had a kind of civic religion, a belief in the U.S. Constitution, in the rule of law, a belief in the common decency and selflessness of the Arizona cowboys she grew up with, and even some of those Arizona state legislators she worked alongside. Faith that if we work together and share the credit, we can get the job done. Really, any job, especially the most important one of caring for each other. How lucky we were to have her, and how we miss her.
My name is Sandra Day O'Connor. I am the middle son. When Mom first joined the court in 1981, some justices used 4 clerks a year. Several justices managed to get by with the older tradition of just 3 clerks. Potter Stewart, whose retirement in July 1981 created the opportunity for Mom, had already hired his 3 clerks for the October 1981 term. Mom worried that this dream job for 3 brilliant young lawyers would soon suddenly be eviscerated if she were to hire her own crop of new clerks and young lawyers. So she wanted someone to add to this crop, and someone she could trust. Maybe someone a little closer to her own age to help her adjust to her new, intimidating role. Dad suggested one of his partners at the Fenimore Craig law firm, and Ruth McGregor, thankfully, said yes. And what a marvelous choice indeed. Ruth loved the work and came back to Arizona wanting to become a judge herself someday. She did fairly well, ultimately becoming one of 2 O'Connor law clerks to serve as Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court. From 1981 on, Ruth and Mom were the best of friends to the very end of Mom's life.
Thank you, Brian. Today, we mourn the death of Sandra Day O'Connor and gather to share our grief. But today is also a day to celebrate the life of this extraordinary woman. We can grieve and celebrate together because we are all connected to Sandra O'Connor in some way. For some, the connection is deeply personal. For others, professional. And others are connected through their love and admiration for this woman who brought so much to our lives. My connection with Justice O'Connor followed many paths. As Justice O'Connor, she was my boss when I was a law clerk, my mentor, my role model, and my cheerleader when I needed one. When I became a judge, we worked as colleagues on projects related to judicial independence, civic education, and the rule of law. As Sandra O'Connor, she played the role of my big sister, a very bossy big sister, and gave me advice, sometimes sought, about nearly everything. Cooking, travel, how to handle difficult people, how to hit a forehand, and what roads to take and what lane to be in when I drove us anywhere. But most important of all, she was my friend, and I loved her. Much of the world thinks of Sandra O'Connor as the person who was the first woman on the United States Supreme Court, a judge who was brilliant, strategic, determined, decisive, and sometimes stern. She was all those things. But the Sandra O'Connor we celebrate today was so much more. She was warm, loyal, funny, adventurous, loving, and kind. Throughout her career, Sandra O'Connor understood and embraced her ability to use her power and influence to encourage and help others. The first indication of just how great her influence would be came with the announcement of her nomination. Across the country, women cheered. Whether they were lawyers, judges, law students, high school or elementary students, or people unconnected with the law, we felt empowered, energized, and joyful. Everything became possible. Shouldering the weight of the hopes of so many must have been a heavy burden, but it was one Sandra O'Connor shouldered well. Perhaps nowhere was her ability to influence and encourage more evident than in her relationship with her law clerks, the group she called her second family. Those of us fortunate enough to serve in the O'Connor chambers gained much more than a job for a year. Justice O'Connor managed to make her chambers not just a workplace, but a work home. Whether it was bringing in food for Saturday meetings or organizing seasonal celebrations, she was all in to strengthen her personal ties with the clerks as well as with their families. Now, her personal warmth did not temper her ability to be a demanding boss. She expected the same of her clerks as she did of herself, that we do our very best without complaint or excuse and get things done. But in return, she gave us a lifetime of support and encouragement. She believed we could and should accomplish anything we were willing to work hard to do. And because she believed in us, we believed in ourselves. Who were we to question the justice? And her kindness enabled her to change the lives of so many. One of the early indications I saw of Justice O'Connor using her position and innate kindness to impact the life of another happened early in her first term. She wanted to make a Southwestern casserole that required tomatillos, not easily found in Washington in 1981. So we went on a hunt, and found some canned tomatillos in a specialty grocery store. The young man who checked her out recognized her, and after gasping that he was a law student, carried her bags to the car, leaving all the other customers standing at his register. The next day, she instructed me to go back and find him and invite him and a friend to attend the next oral argument session. And after only a little lurking about the store, I found him. On the appointed day, our new friends, both young men from the Outer Banks, one a law student at American and one at Howard, attended oral arguments, sitting in the special box reserved for guests of the justices. When argument concluded, the young men were taken to her chambers for a private lunch with the justice. No one knew, no public relations announcement told of what she had done, but her kindness gave two young men an unforgettable day. And we cannot celebrate properly the life of Sandra O'Connor without celebrating her capacity for loving. First and always foremost, she loved her family. She was forever grateful to John O'Connor for his unwavering support and willingness to adjust his life for hers. Theirs was a marriage we all envied, with just enough disagreement and bickering to let us know the relationship was real. And of course, the justice was so proud of her sons. She loved watching them as they each became his own person, different from their parents and each other in as many ways as they were alike. And she loved and welcomed her daughters-in-law and, of course, her grandchildren, the best-looking, most talented, smartest, and generally most attractive grandchildren in the world. If anyone ever doubted that a woman could perform in a high-pressure, high-visibility, difficult position and still have time to enjoy and take care of her family, and there were many such doubters, Sandra O'Connor gave us the answer. But today we also celebrate and remember the love and loyalty she gave to and received from her many friends. When she left Phoenix for Washington, she physically left, a group of close, longtime friends. When she returned, her friends were waiting because she never really left them. Her circle of friends constantly expanded, but never to the exclusion of those already part of that circle. And no celebration of Sandra's life could be complete without acknowledging her special connection to and love of the West, its land, and its people. For many years, my husband Bob and I owned a home in southeastern Arizona, a place whose rolling grasslands, grazing cattle, and distant mountains reminded the Justice of her beloved Lazy Bee, and she visited there as often as she was able. Our early activities with the Justice often included horseback riding, and we had access to the horses of a woman who raised and trained Peruvian pasos. On our first ride, which followed no safety rules and imposed no limits, the horse's owners simply pointed toward a utility pole far in the distance over the grasslands and said we would meet there. Sandra needed no further invitation. She left, cantering toward the pole, with the rest of us doing our best to keep up. And when we returned, cowgirl Sandra pronounced the pasos the most fabulous horses ever and bemoaned the fact that she had not discovered them 75 years earlier. During later years, we focused on bird watching, visiting the local wineries, or four-wheeling through the canyons where she could see and comment upon the condition of the free-ranging cattle. On one occasion, she became concerned, and she insisted that I find a way to contact the owner of some cattle whom I did not know and inform him that it was imperative that someone check on those cattle now. He was understandably wary as I began my halting explanation. But when I said that the instruction came from Justice O'Connor, he assured me of immediate action. She had that impact on people. The rural Arizona setting made her relaxed and reflective of her life on the ranch. One evening, as we watched the sunset, probably with a glass of local wine in hand, I mused that we likely would sell the property sometime in the next years. She immediately instructed me that we could not sell, that the property was irreplaceable, and that selling would be a serious mistake. I agreed, and peace was restored. But some years later, after Alzheimer's disease had accelerated its cruel attack on Justice O'Connor, we did sell our home. I never told her, so that during our visits, we could go on making plans for her next visit to the ranch. Through our sadness and grief today, we have so much to celebrate. We were all so fortunate to have Justice Sandra Day O'Connor as a part of our world and our lives. If ever there was a life well lived and well examined, it was the life of Sandra O'Connor. When asked the tombstone question, she always replied that she would be content if inscribed on it were the words, "Here lies a good judge." But if she would permit one final editing suggestion from a former law clerk, I would propose that we add, "and an even better person." We love you and we'll miss you, Sandra.
My name is Dylan O'Connor. Justice O'Connor was my grandmother. She gave a speech in my grade school in San Francisco about her religious background and how it influenced her. In the same speech Grandma gave at Stanford in 2009, she turned to the subject of religion. She described how her ideas and beliefs developed with inspirations from her favorite professor, Harry Rathbun.
World. The universal questions that we humans ask ourselves are, what am I? Who am I? And where am I going? These are religious questions. To quote Harry Rathbun, everyone has a religion, whether he knows it or not. Religion has historically been concerned with people's views and attitudes about themselves, about the world in which we live, and about what we have to do to survive and have meaning in our lives. To build a sound religion or philosophy of life, we need to take account of all relevant knowledge and wisdom about the nature of man, the nature of our environment, and those relationships between us and our environment over which we have some control. Harry Rathbun believed all science is based on the idea that there is order in the universe, and it is discoverable by us with honesty and patience. He thought each of us has a religion, whether we know it or acknowledge it or not. It is that by which we live and by which we make our decisions. It is our effort to come to terms with our total environment for living. His religion was a realistic one, and he thought that as humankind matured and learned more about the universe, our religious beliefs matured as well, and they become closer to the perception of things as they are. Yes, 1 billion years and development from a single cell is a success story. But the story is by no means ended. Harry Rathbun said, "Wisdom is a product of mature religion. Conversely, mature religion is also a product of wisdom." He reminded us that we have as humans some built-in human drives. First, our drive for self-preservation. Second, the drive to reproduce ourselves. And third, the more subtle drive to evolve, to realize our maximum potential. It's this last one that leads us more often astray. For instance, it could mean earning more money than our peers, or getting our second SUV or a second home. Now, if those are our dominant goals, then maybe we're misreading our road signs and directions. Achieving our potential to the maximum for Harry Rathbun, and I must say for me, also means taking seriously the concept that we live in an orderly universe and that we must obey nature's order, including being loyal and devoted to God. When Jesus of Nazareth was asked what was the most important thing, he said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength." The second commandment, Jesus said, was, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Ashley Montague, the anthropologist, said, "To love thy neighbor as thyself is not merely good text material for Sunday morning sermons, it is absolutely sound biology."
I am Courtney Day O'Connor, the first grandchild of my grandma Sandra. On the court, in just her second year, she was asked to give a speech on how a Christian might reconcile with her faith with the duties of being a lawyer and a judge. This was a tough assignment. She turned to one of her clerks, Jane Fahey, to help her write the speech. After her clerkship, Jane practiced law in Atlanta, doing both commercial litigation and pro bono work, but eventually found her calling as a Presbyterian minister. She is here with us today to talk about that experience in 1982.
Thank you, Courtney. As Courtney said, just a few months into my 1982 clerkship with Justice O'Connor, she asked me to assist with a speech on faith. An unusual assignment, to be sure. And I was filled with more than the usual trepidation in undertaking an assignment for the justice. The topic of faith is, for some, so private, so personal. So trying to make room for her own freedom of conscience, I tepidly said when I gave her a draft, "Now you'll want to modify all this to fit your convictions." But I needn't have fretted so much. We agreed on the fundamental view that all of life, including our professional life, is lived under a sovereign God. And we, as you just heard, are to serve God and neighbor in whatever we do. There is no need to segment life into sacred and secular. As I later learned, her view of a sovereign God and a life directed toward God's purposes had its roots in life on the Lazy Bee and her time at Stanford. Her early life was filled with holy encounters. As she later poetically described it, in the endless sky, the Milky Way, the sunrise and sunset, the miracle of rain, in the newborn calves and colts with their soft hair and wobbly legs, in wildflowers turning rocky hillsides golden. Again, in her words, some called it Mother Nature. We called it God. The Lazy Bee is where her experience of reverence, awe, wonder began. One might say hers was a sacramental view of life. That life is charged with holy splendor if we will only look. And that delight in the natural world shaped her insistence that we law clerks take time to enjoy the cherry blossoms around Washington's tidal basin. Take time to soak in the beauty, was her instruction. Whether springtime flowers or museum exhibits or the visual or performing arts. And while she relished the transcendence she experienced in nature, her faith was, like her jurisprudence, profoundly practical. So it's not surprising and entirely fitting that the justice chose this verse from Micah for her funeral. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Notice the verbs. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Hers was an embodied faith, faith in action visible in the choices she made, in the purposes to which she devoted her considerable energies and talents. She took to heart the wisdom of her pivotal Stanford professor, Harry Rathbun, that one committed person can make a constructive difference for the common good. And so she headed to law school. She lived that gospel about one committed person making a difference throughout her life, most obviously as a jurist, but also as founder of iCivics. But I also never ceased to be inspired by her speeches to law students, especially in those years when job prospects for graduating students were slim. She eloquently described the privilege, the thrill of being able to ply a trade in which a single lawyer could make a difference, whether in an individual client's life or perhaps even in the whole system. She encouraged those students, saying, "Don't be afraid to hang out your own shingle as I did. You will learn invaluable lessons about the problems of ordinary folks and how the law or a change in the law can help." To do justice. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, justice refers to God's order for the whole of life. It includes legal justice, of course, but it's broader. So in that speech on faith some 41 years ago, she suggested that lawyers have an obligation not simply to tell their clients what the law permits, but to counsel them to do the right thing, the moral thing. And for her, doing justice on earth meant always seeking to understand what impact will my decision have on my neighbor, on our common life. To love kindness. We all experienced her kindness. For law clerks, this included obeying her cardinal rule that no matter the written arrows launched in your direction by another justice opinion, one did not respond in kind. The art of disagreeing agreeably was a matter of fundamental kindness and respect. In Hebrew, the word kindness also implies being bound in solidarity with God and neighbor. The justice was always at work, building bridges, fostering relationship. She understood the power of breaking bread to forge community. I understand she and John could throw a pretty good party here in Phoenix. But as Evan noted, in Washington also, she encouraged the justices to break bread together, and she regularly cooked wonderful Southwestern fare for her law clerks on those Saturdays we gathered to debate the court's upcoming cases. To walk humbly with your God. Even the justice's jurisprudence was marked by a humility about the limits of human wisdom. One simply could not foresee all the future circumstances in which any broad, sweeping legal principles might be applied. For her, incremental resolution, grounded in the facts, was the wiser course. But it was her sobering 1988 cancer diagnosis that sparked a new humility about the fragility of life. Not everything is within our control or can be fixed by a rugged Western determination and hard work. In my pastoral experience, such sobering news can take us down to the basement of life, where we examine the foundations. Foundation was already there for her, and her ability to affirm with the psalmist that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. But my sense is that she drew more deeply on those foundations in her later years. Not only as she confronted her health challenges, but also John's. She understood that her own wounds could be a source of healing for others. And so in her kindness, the tough-minded cowgirl shared her vulnerability. With courage and candor, she spoke with cancer survivors and testified about the need for greater attention to the impact of Alzheimer's on patients and their loved ones. That was among the last of her many, many gifts to us. How grateful we are for this doer of justice, this lover of kindness, this humble child of God. May all of us live so faithfully, so fully.
My name is Adam O'Connor, and I am a grandson of Sandra. Keely is my twin sister. I have the distinct honor of introducing one of Grandma's colleagues, Justice Anthony Kennedy of the Supreme Court, who was also appointed by President Reagan in 1987, who was also a graduate of Stanford, and who was also often found at the center of the court, much like Grandma. Justice Kennedy remained on the court after Grandma retired and did not take senior status until 2018. They were on the court together for 13 years. We are very grateful that Justice Kennedy has made the trip to Phoenix to honor his friend and colleague. Please help me welcome Justice Anthony Kennedy.
loving members of the wonderful O'Connor family, and esteemed and distinguished visitors, we gather here to join in showing our lasting affection and admiration for all that the O'Connors gave to so many of us. John O'Connor loved stories, especially those that left us laughing. His repertoire seemed endless. No matter the subject of the story that you told, he had an anecdote to follow it, and usually to top it. Of course, he and Sandra liked true stories too. And they had so many to tell from the remarkable life that they shared. Sandra, in all of her years, sought always to find new and larger meaning in life, as has been noted already here in the eloquent remarks that have preceded this presentation of mine. She wanted to share that meaning with us and hoped that we felt the same way about wanting to explore our own existence year after year. How do we describe Sandra's outlook and philosophy? One possible beginning point is to discuss for just a few moments what some writers consider at the outset of their work when they begin to write. They think about a sense of time, a sense of voice, and a sense of place. And let us think for these remarks about time, voice, and place as Sandra might have thought about it. First of all, with respect to time, it seemed to many of us that the dynamics of time were as fascinating with respect to Sandra as with any other person we knew. Her life was composed of many epochs. Her life and thoughts began with the years on the ranch, and it seems to me we can't hear enough about the lazy bee. It's been a very special set of moments for me to see these videos. Sandra often told her friends about those times. Her days could be long and lonely, but still she found rich meaning in them. Of course, there were other times for her, when she went to law school, when she accompanied John on his military assignment to Europe, and then later the wonderful time she spent with her children as they grew in talent and dignity. Those are among some of the moments in her early star-filled life. Sandra's life and career were shaped by a sense of time. Her achievements projected that time to the world at large. For all of us, and for the nation, and for the world at large, 1981 was and remains a central time, a central year, a central historic moment in Sandra's life, as Evan Thomas and other speakers have noted, 1981. This was when she became the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court. That time, that year, marked an historic moment for Sandra, for the law, and for the nation. Sandra understood the flow of time in the law and the flow of time in our own lives. In the law, judges over time understand experiences of the past that guide us as we shape decisions today and yet to come. They seek to find wisdom so there can be justice in each case. And they hope for wisdom to address the new questions that will arise as time goes on. And that brings us to voice. It leads us to Sandra's voice. It was a voice shaped by the experiences of the past and by her hopes and aspirations for the future. At the court's formal conferences, Sandra enjoyed our discussions and was always articulate and well-spoken. She would show different modes of thought that invariably proved helpful and intriguing. In some cases, she had a clear sense of what the outcome should be and would cogently and compellingly explain her views. Other cases, of course, proved more complex and difficult to grasp. And Sandra would thoughtfully explore with all of us the often obscure, difficult, sometimes even mysterious questions presented by so many of our cases. Outside of work, Sandra's voice was known as being warm, courteous, and engaging. Years before she came to Washington, this was well known to you in Arizona. One of the persons who knew Sandra well was the late Chief Judge Richard Chambers from Tucson. He was Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit for many years. And he too came from a family of ranchers. He told us that the Days were known in Arizona as being the best of neighbors and always friendly. This was soon known throughout all of Washington, D.C. Sandra's voice was still ever warm and courteous, ever fascinating, often inviting laughter, often inviting wonderful thoughts. This was the voice that we heard when Mary came with me to Washington. Sandra's voice made all the difference for us as she and John gave us the warmest possible welcome. Of course, Sandra worked closely with me, and we worked together on projects of mutual interest. Soon after my coming to Washington, President Reagan asked me to go to Argentina to discuss rule of law issues with then President Carlos Menem. And we wanted to discuss the importance of the rule of law. In one of my first meetings with him, the subject of judging arose, and President Menem asked me to come to Argentina to meet with the judges on a separate visit. And it, of course, seemed to be helpful and necessary to have some assistance in these meetings, and Sandra agreed to come. So John and Mary joined us. Sandra's guidance and assistance substantively in the meetings were of significant importance. Now, whenever the subject of scheduling arose, Sandra's voice must always be heard. On the very day we arrived, and after she had read my schedule, she said, "I've made arrangements for the four of us to go to the tango bar at midnight." My response of, "That's far too late for me." But Sandra's voice was strong. As usual, she prevailed. And guess who was seen dancing at 2:30 in the morning in the tango bar? And now we come to the sense of place. When President Reagan asked Mary and me to come to Washington, we were reluctant to do so. We knew the children would not come. They were either still in college or just out. We were concerned that Mary, and both of us, but particularly Mary, would be lonely in Washington. Sandra and John knew this, and they made all the difference. They did something that many others might be reluctant to do. They shared with us their closest friends. And because of Sandra and John, the sense of place that we found in Washington was immediate and warm. They invited us to their home often. We became members of her bridge group. You shouldn't overbid when Sandra's your partner. In just a few years, Sandra began asking Mary to help greet newcomers to Washington, such as foreign ambassadors. So it was through Sandra that Mary became so familiar in Washington, and we will always thank Sandra for that. Going back to Stanford, at Stanford, Sandra knew and admired the famous author Wallace Stegner, and there's already been a quotation from him. And he was a professor in the university's English department. Stegner also became one of my professors and inspired me. He wrote with eloquence about friendship and about the West. As for friendship, Stegner said this: "It is love and friendship, the sanctity of celebration of our relationships, that not only support a good life, but create one." Friendships created a splendid life for Sandra, and she wanted the same for us. Sandra knew that John was central to her life, and she knew too that Mary was central to mine. That sense of place that Mary found with me in Washington, the same sense of place that Sandra and John themselves had found a few years earlier, was an exciting and reassuring experience, an exciting and reassuring place. The O'Connors' friendship with us was the rock upon which we built our lives in Washington. And, of course, the sense of place takes us back to Sandra's home, back to the ranch, back to Arizona. Arizona was never far from her thoughts. Arizona was for Sandra as it is for so many of you here today. Not a faraway, closed place, but a dynamic presence where you can begin to see new and wonderful horizons. Stegner's description of the West must have resonated with Sandra, and perhaps it will with many of you here today. He wrote this: "The West at large is hope's native home, the youngest and freshest of America's regions, magnificently endowed with the chance to become something unprecedented and unmatched in the world." Indeed, that description fits Sandra herself. Endowed with wit and wisdom, she became something unprecedented and unmatched in this world. Sandra always wanted to return to Arizona. Her home here stood for hope, and her accomplishments in linking a decent world path to a future we must always join together to make sure that we become ever closer to the idea of freedom, the idea that Sandra so well understood. The work of freedom is never done. Thank you.
Again, I'm Scott O'Connor, the eldest of the three O'Connor boys. We're very glad you all chose to be with us today as we say goodbye to Mom. This is the last of the services planned for her, apart from burying her ashes with our fathers on a remote mountaintop at the Lazy Bee Ranch, alongside her parents. Next week, our grieving can really begin. Mom will be reunited with Dad in heaven. They had a romantic and rewarding partnership of nearly 60 years. Their marriage was the finest example I know, each deferring their own careers for the other in turn when the time was right, and each being a beautiful ballroom dance partner. They literally caused dance floors to clear just so people could watch them do their thing. This turned out to be a valuable skill in Washington, D.C. society. A former clerk recently told me, "One of my strongest memories of the justice is how her eyes sparkled when she was with or talked about your dad. It was clear to anyone who saw the two of them together that he brought out her more relaxed, fun-loving side." Growing up, we were clueless as to how unusual our mother was. She always had us enrolled in after-school activities so as not to be idle before she got home from work. She arranged for other stay-at-home moms to drive us to and from with their own children. That took planning and a great network of friends. Weekends were always booked solid from Saturday morning to Sunday night. Tennis, golf, swimming, and picnics with other families near Pinnacle Peak before it was developed. Vacations were planned long in advance. Christmas and spring breaks meant skiing in Utah, Colorado, or Idaho, often with other families from coast to coast. Summertime meant a short recreational swim season, perhaps a whitewater rafting trip somewhere in the West, and then a month or more at the Lazy Bee, where our big Uncle Al gave us military-style buzz cuts on arrival, and he became our substitute dad for the duration of our stays. Mom and Dad used this time to vacation together without the kids. Smart planning right there. We were sent to the Lazy Bee to experience what Mom did as a child, ranch work and ranch play. It was hot, and we all got tired from the hard work, but we had fun when we weren't working, and we had love from our grandparents, Mo and D.A., our uncle, aunt, and cousins. Big Uncle Al's favorite prank, which we didn't fully comprehend until years later, first had us bucking hay for a few hours until the flatbeds were all stacked and loaded with 60-pound bales of hay. The youngest among us would steer the truck around at the end of each row, usually standing on the seat in order to see over the dash. As a reward, Big Al would organize us into a raiding party to steal watermelons from the neighboring farm, decadently eat only the hearts, and throwing away the rest. After we had gorged on fresh melons, Big Al would yell out that he had spotted the farmer, shotgun in hand, loaded with saltpeter, coming our way. "Run!" We'd be terrified. We'd run back to the trucks to make an escape. Later, back at headquarters, Big Al would call Mom, wherever she was, and tell her how much fun it was stealing melons from the next field of our own farm. At ranch headquarters, we had a herd of horses and a barn full of tack. We could saddle up and ride anywhere on 200,000 acres, as long as we said where we were going so that they could search for us if we weren't home in time for dinner. Again, we didn't realize how different that was. Mom wanted us to have these experiences, especially the hard outdoor work with cowboys, whose life goals were to ride better, rope better, and get by doing work that they loved. Today, I'm reminded that for cattle ranchers, rain is life-giving. Rain is celebrated. It makes the grass grow. So our weather this morning is a blessing from above for Mom. Mom and Dad both understood what a good education means. They made sure my brothers and I had every opportunity and did the same for their grandchildren. Mom loved nature. Got to get this picture up here, John. Inside the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse, nature loved Mom. All right, John, let's find that one. I'll tell it. There's a statue of Mom, bigger than life. It's like 8 or 9 feet tall. It's on the mezzanine level of the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse, which is a huge glass atrium. And one day somebody held the door open a bit long, and a young red-tailed hawk made its way into the atrium and flew around, trying to find a place to rest. Finally settled on Mom's head. We might make it by the end of the show with that picture. It's fantastic. After moving to Washington in 1981, Mom and Dad settled into some new annual rhythms. One of those was Dad's annual July trip to the redwood trees of the Bohemian Grove. Mom used that time for her ladies group, which she named the Mobile Party Unit, or MPU for the insiders. They alternated between North American and exotic destinations for their week-long trips to play tennis and bridge, taking advantage of unique sites in each locality. The MPU had some stalwarts and a few who joined for just a few years at a time. They included the personal chef for the Japanese royal family and an expatriate Phoenician living in a castle in Tuscany with her Florentine husband. Meanwhile, Mom's worldview had expanded far beyond Arizona and even the United States. When the court was not in session, she began traveling on international legal initiatives with her counterparts around the world. She spent 20 years on the board of CELI, the Central and Eastern European Legal Initiative, helping former communist bloc countries write new legal systems for their newly free societies using unpaid volunteer American lawyers who stepped away from their practices months at a time to help their counterparts in the various participating countries. All the volunteers I've encountered say it was the most important and rewarding thing they'd ever done. Mom's job was to recruit them, encourage them, and pat them on the back without having to lean on the wall. She traveled to the participating countries every year for those 20 years to speak with the volunteers in person, as well as with the heads of state of those nations that were participating in the program. Next picture is Mom doing a ribbon cutting at the building that the CELI ended up purchasing in Prague. To the right is Václav Havel, the president of the Czech Republic. Doing all this work overseas while serving as a Supreme Court justice was behind Mom's developing concern that Americans did not appreciate how unique our system really is, with a strong, independent judiciary being necessary for a free society, where our rights are protected and defended. The lawyers in the CELI project nations, in their home countries, had only known judges whose decisions were based on which party offered the bigger bribe, and who feared being fired if the case wasn't decided in line with party preferences. They struggled in their meetings over a beer in a local restaurant with the American volunteers, trying to understand this concept of an independent judiciary. It was completely unimaginable to them. All of this learning would ultimately be put to work in Mom's vision for iCivics, the online civics education platform she created that now reaches 10 million young people in the US every year. Despite the amazing success of iCivics, Mom never took any pay from it. She believed it was her duty, not her job, and not a scheme to make money. She did it because she thought it was the right thing to do with her final productive years, her 80s. There are only a few of Mom's former clerks in the audience today, including Ruth McGregor, Scott Bales, Jane Fahey, Michelle Friedland, Ron L. Anderson-Jones, and Bert Jordan. The big clerk gathering was on Monday at the court. More than 80% of Mom's former clerks, 108 potential total, many told me that working for Mom was the highlight of their careers, but they said what distinguished Mom was not only was she a great justice to work for during their clerkships, she was the best justice after their clerkships had ended, and they went back into the world with her frequent advice, counsel, and networking skills. The audience here today contains family and friends, of course. It contains the faculty and staff of the ASU Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, a relationship that has proven to be wise for Mom, and one of which she's quite proud. I want to especially thank former Dean Doug Sylvester and the new Dean, Stacy Leeds, for honoring Mom with your work. The audience contains the elected leaders of our state government. Thank you for your public service. It is often underappreciated, difficult, and stressful. But somebody has to do it, and we hope as citizens you do it well with honesty and integrity. Thank you, Governor Hobbs, for reaching out after Mom passed and for lowering the flags in her honor. Lastly, the audience contains lots of judges, state, county, and federal. On behalf of Mom, I want to thank you most of all for your role in defending and protecting our democracy. You are the thin black line between order and chaos. Mom was proud to be one of you. She loved her role, working with and encouraging judges to improve our systems and our institutions. Mom's surviving family includes her beloved brother, Alan, here with us today, with whom she wrote her best-selling book. He graciously accepted, with a wink, that the publisher put Mom's name in a bigger font on the cover. She leaves her children, me and my two brothers, Brian and Jay. Mom was delighted that we each married well to Joni, Sean, and Heather. We each gave her grandchildren, Courtney, Adam, and Keely in my case, Weston and Sawyer from Brian, and Jay's boys, Dylan and Luke. I want to especially thank my wife, Joni, who led the family in caring for Mom after she developed dementia. Her love and devotion to Mom's comfort and care was without compromise. She looked after Dad, too, before his death in 2009. Almost 8 years ago, Joni hired a team of 3 full-time caregivers to ensure Mom always got what she needed. They're with us today: Cora Short, Carmen McKenzie, and Bernard Mendoza, who we affectionately call our 3 Musketeers. Huge thanks to about 40 friends of Joni who coordinated and ran this event today, with less than 2 weeks' notice, led by Marianne Sheely and Sally Gunther. All these ladies and a few hardy husbands are fantastic community volunteers here in Phoenix. Thank you, Madison Center for the Arts, headed by Ari Levin. Mom would be delighted. Her celebration took place on an elementary school campus where iCivics is taught. Thank you, Edwin Shue and Stephen Ashbrook, for your performances. Thank you, John Felix, on the video work. We'll get that hawk one of these days. And Dennis Thompson on flowers. Thank you, Ruth McGregor. You've been such a steadfast friend. Thank you, Jane Fahey. Today is the 3rd time this week you've shared rare insights into Mom's spirituality. Thank you, Justice Kennedy. We are honored by your kind and thoughtful tribute to Mom and your friendship. All right, I've gone on too long. We're going to get out of here with a song written and performed by Jim Sailstrom, who we wish was here with us today, alive, but he's going to do the best he can today, using bits and pieces from YouTube and some pictures from Mom and Dad's life together. Thank you, everybody.
She learned to shoot and ride with brother Alan by her side. She'd learned to drive a car when she could see above the dash. Her mother and father saw their daughter pass the test. She headed for the West Coast, where Stanford was the best. She hitched up with her partner, O'Connor is the one. And together they have traveled so many things they've done. These loving, laughing lawyers have helped the world to run. We honestly know them as a true phenomenon. Yippee-yi-oh, yippee-yi-yay. Justice O'Connor with partner John, she's Sandra Day. From the green of Chevy Chase to the mighty Rio Grande, She's working for the country to interpret where we stand. She rises to the challenge and respects what life demands as a Supreme Court justice. She's the best throughout the land. She's riding herd as justice coast to coast and across the plains. Hard work, determination, solid goals and solid plans. But with a twinkle and a spirit, it never hurts to have you some. The luck of the Irish, she made a hole in one. Yippee-yi-yo, yippee-yi-yay, yeah! Justice O'Connor, with partner John, she's Sandra Day. Yippee-yi-yo, yippee-yi-yay, yeah, you clerks! Justice O'Connor, with partner John, she's Sandra Day.